Hey folks, welcome back to Patriot to the Core podcast. I am Thad Forrester. Appreciate you listening again this week. Our guest is Mr. Terry Dailey. He is a Vietnam veteran, and we're going to talk about an organization that he started called Project Patriot Bikes. And before we get to that, I just want to give a shout out to Sheepdog Firearms. Sheepdog is a new indoor firing range in Trussville, Alabama, and they have been very supportive to me and also to the Mark Forrester Foundation, and allowed me to do this interview. This is my first interview with Terry that I've done in person, and there's probably going to be a few more of those to come, and so appreciate their support. They're very knowledgeable, very nice folks. I encourage you to go visit them if you're ever in the Trussville, Alabama area. I also want to remind you that we are on Patreon. Patreon is just a way where you can support people like me who provide content that you hopefully like. So it's an opportunity to pay very low, there's $2, $5, $10 a month, just small plans like that. And you get something in return, whether it's the episodes of my podcast earlier or the opportunity to be a guest writer on the blog, or, to get a signed book. They're just small, simple things that I can offer, but just to show some support, to give a little more kind of insider information and access. So please go check it out. There is a link in the show notes, but it's patreon.com/patriot to the core. So patreon.com/patriot to the core, and that's where you'll find my page. Now with Mr. Terry Dailey. This guy, I'll just tell you, I read an article about him in our local paper several weeks ago, and they highlighted his organization. It's a nonprofit, Project Patriot Bikes. Talked about him being a Vietnam vet and what he's doing now. And really, Project Patriot Bikes seeks to create motorcycles that inspire patriotism and are a tribute to the veterans of the U.S. military who have defended our country. Its purpose is to reach out to groups and communities and individuals in an educational format. Through the visual aspect of the bikes, Project Patriot Bikes will raise public awareness of each branch of the military and install a renewed level of patriotism. He currently has two beautiful Harleys that are decorated. You'll see some pictures on my website. His goal is to have one to represent each branch of the military, and that takes money, of course. But he found out as he rode around town and went to some different events, a lot of people wanted to have their picture made with him and his bike, and people started opening up and talking to him. So that's kind of why he started the organization. He's retired and loves this country, and just wants to recognize the many heroes we have and have had who serve our country. And so anyway, we have a great conversation. I hope you enjoy, and I hope that the background noise is not too distracting for you. We were at an indoor firing range, and you can hear the guns, but we did the best we could with the audio. So sit back and relax and listen. So we're sitting here at Sheepdog Firearms. This is my first face-to-face interview for Patriot to the Core. So thanks, Mr. Terry Dailey, for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be the first.
And great. And we're here in the lobby of Sheepdog, so I'm sure it's going to get loud, and that's okay. They have a business to run, and there's some people firing not too far away from here in the indoor range. But so I'm looking at your two bikes that you've got. You've got a beautiful one outside the building and one inside the building.
Thank you.
So what are those bikes for?
Well, the bikes are part of course, Project Patriot Bikes, but they're part of a veteran appreciation program that we do. They're to me what a canvas is to an artist. There's something to be absorbed visually, but at the same time to open up avenues of conversation. It allows us to meet people and hear their stories, and it also allows us to talk with people as we meet people in an effort to raise the level of patriotism that I feel like personally is lacking in this country. Mm-hmm. Not totally lacking. There's a lot of people that are very patriotic, but I don't think patriotism is, well, I know it's not what it was when I was younger and everything.
What about, there's a lot of different directions we can go here, so I got to make sure I don't forget, but you talk about the patriotism. What about when you return home from Vietnam? Mm-hmm.
how were you received then, and how does patriotism compare now to what it was then when you got home? I don't know if you got home in the mid-'70s.
No, I came home in December of 1968.
Okay, you got home in 68. So compare the patriotism and the feeling in the country to what you experienced then to what you think it is now.
It was, there was no patriotism per se. There was, but not in John Q. Public like maybe you have seen in the past. When I came home from Vietnam, having served in Vietnam was not something that you really bragged on. I can honestly say I was never spit on or anything like that, but I do know people that it happened to. It's just that I was fortunate, I guess. But it was not something that you went around and mentioned. In fact, I even did a job interview one time where I failed to mention that I had been to Vietnam. And consequently, I didn't get the job because I failed to mention that I was in Vietnam.
Okay.
I didn't mention it because it was frowned on at that time. And I always feel bad about not saying something about it because I don't know anybody that's ever served there that is ashamed of having served. Everybody was like myself. We were young. Regardless of your political views, this country called on us, just like they do now, to go in to serve in the military, and we went in the military, and we did what we were told to do.
Were you drafted?
No, I joined.
Okay.
In fact, I went in when I was 17 years old, straight out of high school. I joined the first day of June of 1967. I was 17 years old. And Mother and Daddy had to sign for me to go, or Daddy did. And my mother was totally against me going in. Most mothers probably are. My dad, who was a World War II veteran, kind of set me down and had a little talk with me. And the biggest thing he asked me, he said, "Son, do you know what you're doing?" Of course, it's 17. I knew everything, so sure, I knew what I was doing.
Of course.
Yeah, I found out that maybe I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but he told me, he said, "I'll sign if that's what you want." He says, "But do you know what you're doing?" Well, I didn't know. I found out real quick and everything, but I was raised on John Wayne movies. Now, this is a little story I used to tell. I was raised on John Wayne movies. And according to John Wayne, there's war is clearly divided between the good guy and the bad guy. And in the long run, the good guy always wins. So that's the way I was raised. Well, I found out that John Wayne kind of lied to me a little bit. I'm still a John Wayne fan, but I found out that was my first taste of reality as opposed to fantasy. John Wayne movies and any movies like that are fantasy. The reality is far different. And I guess it's that way in most things.
So what were you like? How had you changed from when you got home to when you left as a 17-year-old boy go into boot camp?
Correction.
Basic training.
Boot camp is Navy. Basic training is Army.
Gotcha. Good.
Okay.
Good. I knew there was a difference.
Yeah.
I picked the wrong one.
Yeah, picked the wrong one. Anyhow, it's hard to say how I changed because how was I at 17? I was a kid. When I came back, I wasn't a kid. I looked at the world altogether different and everything. And Vietnam and the Army itself is one of those situations where I used to say I wouldn't do it again for $1 million, but I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, if it need be, I would have done it again. Yes. But it probably is the one single episode of my life that formed me into who I am. A very defining time anyhow, and good, bad, or otherwise. It played a large part in me becoming the person that I am.
Okay, so you got home in 68. You went in when did you say?
I went in June of 67. I spent Christmas of 67 in Vietnam.
Okay, so you deployed once to Vietnam?
Yeah, I went one time, and that was just pretty much enough for me.
Okay.
If they had sent me back, I would have gone back. In fact, I would have stayed in the Army. And of course, if I stayed in, I knew I was going back. When I got out, the Army had a regulation that they could, when you come back from Vietnam, they couldn't send you back for 14 months unless you volunteered. If you volunteered, you go right back. But if you didn't volunteer, they couldn't send you back for 14 months. Well, when I got out of service, I had been back 14 months. So I knew if I re-enlisted, I was going back. Well, they had a policy at that time to where if you re-enlisted for 6 years, you could pick 1 year of duty station anywhere in the world you wanted to go. They would guarantee you that duty station for 1 year. Well, I was stationed at that time at Redstone Arsenal, and I wanted them to guarantee me I would stay at Redstone Arsenal for 1 more year, and I would re-enlist. Well, they would guarantee you that 1 year, but they got to pick which year it was.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, I had married when I come back from Vietnam, and my wife was pregnant, and I was not going to go back to Vietnam while she was pregnant. So, when they couldn't guarantee that I would stay there at Redstone Arsenal, I chose to go ahead and get out and everything. So, yeah.
So what did you do while you were in the Army? What was your job?
I was with the Corps of Engineers. I was what was referred to as a combat engineer. And what I did in Vietnam was we would go out and build fire bases, base camps, artillery pads. We would generally go out with a platoon of infantry. They would set up perimeter, and we would build whatever facility we were there to build. And then once it was built, then they took over, and we left and went somewhere else. So we were, it was in construction. Most of it was heavy equipment. We moved. We had a couple of D7 dozers in addition to other equipment and everything. And most of the time we trucked in. There was a few times that they lifted the equipment in with a helicopter, and then they just set us down in the middle of nowhere, and we built whatever it was we were supposed to build.
What was the environment like? Were you always having to look over your shoulder? Did you have plenty of security all around watching you?
Well, you never had enough security. Did it get hot a few times? Yes, it did. It got hot several times, as a matter of fact. But we did what we had to do. And there was a time or two that it got just well, I don't know how else to explain it, but it got really hot. Mm-hmm. But it was just part of the job. You had the infantry there that was your security, and they would do what they had to do. You did what you had to do, and then, like I say, we would leave and go elsewhere, and they would take over the facility and everything.
You think it's pretty amazing how you were 17 years old, and a lot of these guys were probably, if you're talking about infantry, kind of protecting that area while you're building, they're probably pretty young guys too.
20 years old was old over there.
Okay. It's pretty remarkable.
Unless you were a ranking officer, 20 years old was old. Most of us were, I had turned 18 before I went to Nam, but most of us were 18, 19 years old. Like I say, if you were 20, you were getting on up in age and everything.
How old were you experiment-wise or experience-wise when you came home, would you say? 40? 50?
I felt that old. Yeah. My situation was no different than anybody else. I don't mean to try to single me out, but you saw things, you did things, you experienced things that really, unless you've been in the military or whatever, you just can't imagine. Mm-hmm. Fear is something that there's degrees and levels of it, and the fear that you experience in a combat situation is some of the ultimate fear.
Yeah. Wow, I'm sure.
And of course the whole thing with fear is whether you control it or it controls you. and that makes a difference.
And you saw both.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure.
Oh yes, yes. I can honestly say, and it was years and years and years before I would ever admit this beyond myself. There was one particular time in my life I wanted to run. I wanted to just turn tail and run. I was that scared, and I can honestly say there's two reasons why I didn't do it. One, I didn't know which way to run. And two, there were some other people there with me that I couldn't do it to them because they wasn't doing it to me.
Yeah.
And that was it and everything. I think it was Colonel Boynton, if I'm saying his name right, of the Black Sheep fame. I'm sure you've probably seen the TV show Black Sheep. But I think it was him that said that combat is hours and hours of boredom interrupted by a few minutes of sheer terror. And I think it was him that said that. But anyhow, whoever said it, that's a very good description of it and everything.
Well, that's what one of my brother's teammates told me, that just a few hours before my brother was killed, he said, we were almost bored, and but they had some active days, but there's a lull.
Sure.
And yeah, it's crazy how quickly it'll change.
Yeah. And it makes you realize training, how important training is, because when it got deep, you just reacted is all you did. You didn't think about it, you just reacted. And you reacted based on your training.
Yeah.
So that's the only way I can explain it. I didn't do anything that I personally felt like I did. I did what I was trained to do. And I did it, I was too scared to think. I just did it,
Well, before we get into Project Patriot Bikes more, how did your training and just your experience in the Army and in Vietnam help you in your life afterwards?
I think it gives you a better perspective on reality. And I don't mean to get too philosophical here and everything, but you realize that a lot of the problems in life are not that serious. You've seen humans at their worst. You've waded into the middle of death, I guess is the way of putting it, and you realize that whether your coffee's too hot or too cold tomorrow morning, or whether you have that cup of coffee or not, that's not all that important and everything. So it just gives you a better perspective on life. So.
Okay, makes sense. So your bike over here, one of yours on the front of it has. We're going to shift to Project Patriot Bikes now.
Right.
So you've got a cemetery, and you've got several different locations, names on there. What are those for?
Well, there's actually 3 rows of crosses that are marked, and like you said, they have locations. The first row has Baghdad and Fallujah on it, I believe. That represents the Middle East, and my brother-in-law served there. The center row of crosses has Iwo Jima and Normandy on it, which represents World War II. And my dad served in World War II. In fact, my dad was with the second wave of troops that hit Normandy on D-Day. He was not on the initial wave, but he was the second wave to go in. And he...
So he already knew how bad it was.
He knew exactly how bad it was and everything. And then the third row of crosses has locations in Vietnam, places that either I have been or places that I figure other people would represent. Mm-hmm. So that's what it is. It's a representation of my family and their contribution to the military and to this country and everything. And it's also a representation or a way to say thank you to the other people that has been involved, if not those exact locations, but in those different theaters of action and everything.
Sure. What's been the reaction from people as you've driven around town and you've gone to different, kind of events? What are people saying and reacting?
Well, the reaction is phenomenal. In fact, I built the first bike just because I wanted to build a patriotic bike. It predates Project Patriot Bike, but I built it, and the reaction that I would get when I would, I'd go down the interstate and cars would run along beside me taking pictures. Kind of made me nervous at first. I actually got used to it after a while. But I'd stop at maybe a service station or a restaurant or whatever, and people would come up to me and just start talking. And of course, initially they would mention hey, it's a good looking bike, nice bike, this and that. But eventually the conversation would get around to themselves. Maybe they were in the military, or they knew somebody, or they brother, dad, sister, mom, whatever. And they would start sharing stories with me. Some of them kind of personal, and I was just so honored that that they would share that with me. And it all started because of the bike. It was just the bike is what caused it all. So that's what got me to thinking about Project Patriot Bike. If stopping at a service station can generate this kind of attention, why don't I start doing this as an exhibit? Going to different events, and I call it part of our veteran appreciation program. And that's what it is. It allows us not only to talk to people maybe that has experienced some of the things we've experienced, but it also allows us to talk with people and explain to them what the bike represents. It represents the freedoms and the liberties that we have in this country, and we have those because of the people that has served, and so many of them that has given their life and everything.
Yeah, so it's amazing. A bike can make people feel like they can open up to you and tell you things they've never talked about or haven't talked about in a long time, but to a complete stranger.
That's true, and I was just amazed with it. But I have tried to kind of analyze it, to figure it out. And I think part of it has to do with in this country especially, a motorcycle, whether you ride a motorcycle or not, it's kind of an icon of freedom. The wind in your hair, going down the road, no cares and everything. So I think just the motorcycle itself represents a certain freedom. And then when you have it looking as these bikes are, as patriotic as they are, then it brings in a patriotic theme to go with the freedom. And that's what it's all about, is again the freedoms and the liberties that we have in this country, and the price that had to be paid for, or that is being paid for us to have these.
Mm-hmm. So what is patriotism to you, and what is a patriot?
Patriotism is defined as love for your country. But if you're going to define patriotism, you have to kind of define what's a country. A country is in a way defined by its borders. The United States. We've got Canada to our north, Mexico to our south, the Atlantic, the Pacific Ocean. That defines our country's landmass, but it doesn't really define the country itself. The country, from a patriotism standpoint, it's a mindset. It's a way of life, and that mindset and that way of life is defined by the liberties and the freedoms we have. So when you start talking about patriotism, and it's a love for the country, but it's a love not for the landmass of the country, but the country and the lifestyle that you have.
Yeah.
And all that's brought on again by the liberties and freedoms that we have.
So a patriot wouldn't blindly defend his country. I mean, because it's the freedom and liberty that he's loving. And if you've got people wanting to take that away, where you're just not going to blindly, okay, well, this is my country, so I'm going to follow them no matter what they do. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that'd be like a nationalist, or you can call that something else maybe. But
well, see, going a step further, the flag is a big part of these bikes because they, of the way they're painted and everything. And I'm always irritated if I see anybody burning a flag. It just really upsets me. But if you think about it for a minute, the flag does not represent a government. It does not represent a political party. It does not represent an individual. The flag is symbolic of our liberties and freedoms. So in your protest, if you burn the flag, you're actually burning the very thing that is symbolic to the freedom you have to protest. So to me, it's kind of like burning your house down because you're mad at the power company or the gas company or the water company. You know, it really does not make sense because, again, the flag does not represent. If you're mad at the government, fine, you know, protest it. If you're mad at the president or the dog catcher or whatever, you know, you've got a right to protest it. But burning the flag just does not in any way follow your protest because that's symbolic of the freedom that you have to protest.
Yeah.
So anyhow.
Well, a few days after my brother Mark was killed, we were there was a lot of, over a week's period of time from his death to when we had the funeral. So there was a lot of things going on, and a lot of his teammates were with us. And so we were going to a memorial event at our high school, and we were still, had caught the word that the protesters were coming from the organization out in Kansas. And of course, they say they're coming to everything. They don't always show up. Yeah. And I think they'd be they're idiots anyway, but to show up in a small town in Alabama, I think would be really dumb. Mm-hmm. But anyway, of course, this is a very sensitive time for us, this period of time right after the death. Yep. And so we're pretty emotional. And I remember sitting in the van with several of his teammates, and these are guys that have just come back from being downrange, been deployed many times. And I said, why would they even do that? How can they do that? And I was pretty mad. And one of the guys, the chief, calmly said, well, we fight for people like them too to have that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's one of those things that just because you can don't mean you should. Yeah. Granted, you have the liberty and the freedom to do such and such, but just because you can don't mean you should.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Well, so what is next for Project Patriot Bikes, or what's your vision?
Well, my vision is a couple of things. Long term, I have these two bikes. One of them I refer to as Old Glory. It's the one that's painted up flag from front to back. And the other one I refer to is the Eagle. It's the one that has the Eagle painted on the tank and everything. I would love to have at some point a bike to represent each branch of the military. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, and as my neighbor pointed out to me the other day, who served in the Coast Guard, Guard also, So I would love to have that. Now whether I ever accomplish it, because it's a pretty good, pretty substantial financial investment, to do these bikes and everything. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to do events. And meet with people, talk with people, and just try to again help them understand and appreciate the freedoms and the liberties that we have. I'm not saying that all the people don't. I learn a lot from them also. But it's just a forum for them to express themselves.
And you've got a flag program. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the flag program is really an idea that I have had for practically all of my adult life. I used to travel before I retired, and I traveled a pretty good area of the country, most of it driving, and I would see flags flying at different businesses and everything, and a lot of times you would see a tattered flag at a business, and I would think, I wish there was some way I could replace that flag. So when we kicked Project Patriot Bike off, I felt like that was the perfect opportunity. And what we do is we challenge the public that if you see a business that's flying a flag that is tattered, worn, or whatever, if you will take a picture of it and email that picture to us, along with the name of the business and their mailing address, we will send them a letter, first off, thanking them for flying the flag. Yeah. We appreciate what they're doing. And then we will send them a complimentary 3x5 flag to replace the flag that they have, along with instructions on the proper way to dispose of their flag. And that program, it has been fairly successful. I really, it just really pleases me when I drive by a business and I look up and I see a flag that I know that we have sent them and that they graciously, put it up and everything. Mm-hmm. Because, a lot of businesses, I don't think anybody intentionally flies a tattered flag. It's one of those things where, they come to work every day, they walk past that flag every day, and eventually they just get to where they don't notice it.
Yep.
Whereas, when you or I see it for the first time, we notice it right off. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a case where they just don't realize it, and then once somebody brings it to their attention, then they're quick to change it out and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I would never let that happen at my house, but shoot, a few years ago, my mom said, she came to visit, she said, "Dad, you need to replace that flag.
Yeah.
It's sitting right by my front door. I don't go through the front door every day, but it's on the front of my house."
Yeah.
And I realized it wasn't tattered, but it was dingy. It was it was not as wide as it needed to be.
Exactly. And like you say, you just in a way you kind of take it for granted, which again in a way is a good thing that you take it for granted because of what it represents. But at the same time, by taking it for granted, you fail to see its slight decline and everything.
Yeah.
So, like I say, we've been very successful in sending these flags out. Again, we don't send a letter that's in any way condescending. We thank them for having a flagpole, for flying the flag. And we send them a complimentary flag, and they put it up, and it just tickles us.
That's a great program. I've heard of people doing that. One of my friends does that just on his own. He'll drop by business and say, "Hey, you want to replace your flag? I got one for you."
Yeah.
All right. So you've got your website. You're a 501c3 nonprofit.
501c3 nonprofit. Yeah.
And what you and I talked about how it's tough to kind of market your organization or yourself, and you don't want people to ever feel like, oh, here comes Terry, here comes that, he's going to be asking for something.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Well, there's a business side to everything, or most things anyhow. And there is a business side to running a nonprofit, and that is trying to maintain a revenue stream of some sort. And of course, a revenue stream is donations. We rely 100% on donations from the private and public sector. Nobody draws a salary. Every dime that we collect goes back into it, maintaining the equipment, traveling, and such as that. But you hear a lot about these larger charities, and I'm not criticizing them or anything, but where the president, CEO, draws his big salary and everything. I'm not getting into that. People got to make a living, but in our little operation, there is no salaries or anything like this. So, but we do have to solicit donations and market what we're doing. And we do that from our website, and the literature that we give out and everything, has the information on it if you're so inclined you want to donate. And what one thing I do stress to people is, donations, the foundation of our donations are the $10, $15, $20 donations that we get from individuals. That's what makes up the bulk of it. Every now and then you might get a corporate check or whatever, but 99.9% of our donations are from just individuals that will, either go to our website and make a donation or mail us a check or whatever, So, and it can be done either way. But yeah, there is that business side of it. It's just one of those things that we have to address.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. And we'll have a link in the show notes to projectpatriotbikes.org, so the listeners, please go check him out and see what good he's doing.
Yep.
Anything else, Terry, that you want to share with us?
Oh, no, I really can't think of anything right offhand. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate what Sheepdog's doing, allowing us, to be here. Got a beautiful facility.
Oh, yeah.
I want to check out the range before I leave. But yeah, it's I appreciate what you're doing, your foundation, and I appreciate Sheepdog having us here and everything. So
Yeah, so anybody in the area, come out to Sheepdog Firearms in Trussville, Alabama. It is a very impressive place. It's been open for a few months, and good folks here. Let's just think about the college-age students. It's not just them, but they're kind of the ones that get a lot of attention. With their, you see so much, at least what the media focuses on, with their, being a lot more sensitive. They got their safe spaces, and they don't seem to appreciate our military or even understand the history of our country at all. What are some of your thoughts on that?
We could do a whole segment on that one. I think it's a situation to where they as in some of your colleges and campuses and everything, are not dealing with reality. And at some point, life is going to kick them pretty hard. Again, I don't even know where to get started on this thing.
That's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Well, like I say, they just fail to deal with the reality, and it's we're to blame. The administrators and whatever of the colleges, they need to be adults. These kids that are going to school are kids. They need to be taught instead of just let run wild. Because again, they don't know what's out there. They don't know what life has to offer. Everything is not roses, and you don't get a trophy every day for getting up and this and that, whatever. So I think our academia is doing a horrible job of teaching these children about life and such. And I think down the road it's gonna come back to bite them in such a manner that it may come back and bite us all as a country.
Yeah.
And that bothers me.
Yeah, sure.
These are our future presidents and senators and congressmen and whatever,
Yeah, we already have plenty right now that are in Washington that have never worked what I say a real job a day in their life.
Yeah.
We don't need to continue that trend.
I agree.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you. You served our country voluntarily, and and even the guys that were drafted, regardless. That is that's just something that I could never understand fully. But I have a deep, deep appreciation for everyone who serves our country and volunteers or chooses to fight evil. So thank you very much, and I know it's been a while since you've actively, since you put on the uniform as an active member of the Army, but I know overall it was a great experience for you, and there's definitely downsides to it, but it's positive.
My grandfather used to say that there's an upside and a downside to everything, and so yeah, my experience in the military, there's an upside and downside to it, but that's life.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me. I enjoyed it, and wish you all the best.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.